Action. Fox News contributor, former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich. Mr. Speaker, we have a lot to talk about tonight. We have these protests in New York. We have the last battle with Israel and Hamas in Rafah, hopefully the last part of that battle. Then you have an economic advisor, chief economic advisor to the president, that doesn't have a clue about the economy, has no background, no expertise in the economy. You heard that answer. That's pretty chilling to me.
Look, I think, Sean, if I had anyone comment about where we are, it's that those of us who are pro-Trump lack the imagination to understand how the other side intends to win. They have a very clear plan. It is to take Trump out of the race. They don't think they can beat Trump. In fact, you hear more and more Democrats say openly they think that Trump would win. And so if you watch the judge in New York, the most important battlefield of this entire campaign is an appointed, corrupt judge in New York who I believe is about to put Donald Trump in prison. And that's a very dangerous thing. It's dangerous to our Constitution. By what right does an appointed local judge put somebody who is the nominee of their party, former president, in prison? But he's openly told us twice now in 2 weeks that it's going to happen. And I think it's very dangerous at the most basic of levels. Just ask yourself, what would it be like to be Trump in prison in New York? And I'll tell you, I am personally more worried tonight about what I see emerging than anything I've seen all year. They know they can't beat him if he's still here. They know they have no answers. They know that Biden's getting weaker and weaker. They know that the whole situation's failing, and yet they are desperate to win. And so I focus as a historian on what's possible when faced with a ruthless, corrupt enemy. And you can tell this, and I said use the word enemy deliberate. These are not competitors. They've taken a guy who was paid by the DNC in 2018 to be a political operative. They took him out of the Justice Department, sent him up to lead the trial against Trump, and they will do whatever else they have to do to make sure that by Election Day, Donald Trump is not a competitor.
Okay, this is a judge that donated to Joe Biden in 2020. This is a judge, many questions have been raised about his own family perhaps benefiting from the outcome of this trial, his daughter in particular. It's been reported pretty much everywhere. Then you have the issue of the statute of limitations have passed. Mr. Speaker, I don't think anybody can tell you what are the charges in this case. What is the second charge? That hasn't even been told. We have a situation where a gag order exists, but only for one person. And meanwhile, you have the lead, a witness for the prosecution is out there on TikTok asking for gifts, and nothing is done to stop or silence that person. Can you explain to me how this kangaroo court is allowed to take place, and what is the outcome if there's a guilty verdict? Will it be overturned on appeal before the election?
Look, it's not about appeal. I worry about what this judge will do to put Donald Trump at risk while the judicial system operates. The problem is lawyers keep pretending that the rule of law is involved here. You have a corrupt district attorney, a corrupt state attorney general, a corrupt judge. His daughter's making millions out of attacking Donald Trump. Now, this is not hearsay. You have a lawyer sent from the Justice Department, number 3 a justice, to prosecute Trump, having been a Democratic National Committee consultant. And in the middle of all this, we're supposed to pretend this is the rule of law. This is not. This is not the rule of law. This is a corrupt, deliberate assault worthy of Putin or worthy of Cuba or worthy of Venezuela. And we better wake up. In an ideal world, the Supreme Court would proactively intervene, strip this judge of this case. Every major neutral lawyer has said there is no case here. This is an absurdity. And yet we continue to grind forward and continue to pretend that this is about the rule of law. This is not. This is a deliberate effort to, at a minimum, have a character assassination, and at a maximum put Donald J. Trump at genuine risk. And I think all of us ought to be aware that this judge has already told us twice, last week and this week, that he intends to put Trump in jail, and he's going to find an excuse, and he's going to do it, and we had better have an answer.
Speaker Gingrich, that's a dire, dire warning for the entire country. We appreciate your time here. Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.